Okay, let me stop this. Welcome to session 1C, art rooms, and hope everyone is, taking a little bit of jog, energized up. We are now in the allegedly in the second half. So for the day, it's our long day, but we have a collection of great papers and presentations for you. Up first is Leland Masek, sorry, apologies, presenting Building a Home for Games as Art. And I will turn it over to Leland.
All right. Boop. All right, does that work? Do people hear me? Is my screen adequately shared? This?
Yes, you're good.
Oh, right. Nice. All right, a bit of feedback. All right, guys. Hi, my name is Leland Masek. I am going to be talking to you about the Games as Art Center, which is a artistic home for games that is running in Tampere and opened this last year and is running for about a year. And we'll talk about the issues of home building and everything else that's been happening, both in theory and in practice, with our attempt to build a home for games as art. So a little bit about who we are. I am Leland Masek. I am a doctoral researcher at Tampere University. We have a gradient of organizers who run things with us. We'll talk about how we run things. We have 6 primary organizers. We have myself. We have Dr. Daniel Fernández Galeote. We have Dr. Velvet Spores. And then 2 of these people you have met, Antonio and Daniel, and Malin, who runs our social media. We have maybe about 15 people who have run a variety of types of events with us over our year of operation, but this is the core 6 who exist right now. We have a group of doctors and PhD students who are running things, and then we have a student intern program through Tampere University where people receive credits for helping run these kinds of events and learn how to conduct and organize research talks and the other things that we do. All right, so what do? We have basically 4 big ways that we've approached this idea of games as an artistic medium, which has then evolved into the idea of arts as a playful medium, because I take a very broad spectrum of what I mean with games. I mean everything that's playful or engagement prioritizing. So first off, we designed a series of games with artistic intent. We produce research talks that are usually based on kind of radical themes. So for example, we have games and sexuality, we have games and climate change or ecological catastrophe, we have games and bodies, and often these themes are meant to kind of jar people if they are thinking of very traditional types of games and game design. We also promoted curations of games with artistic intent, and you can see a set of curations in the photo over there, things like Dysphoria, Black Trans Archive, games that have, let's say, a call to a certain type of artistic meaning, a claim to artistic meaning. And then we host a variety of engaging formats, games, play, traditional arts, including a variety of gameplay communities, artistic digital gameplay, tabletop role-playing game, board gaming community, things like this. All right, just to give you a little bit of taste of how much stuff we were running, what was going on. We got a space through Operatio Pirkanmaa, which is basically a government program to use empty spaces for artistic purposes from September to December 2023. We were also active in February and May, hosting through the Finnish Museum of Games, the Okaniemi Atelier Art Collective, and the Tampere Intercultural Arts Association. During this time, we ran 170 events for 2,500 participants. So when we were running, and this is about 9 months of really active running, we ran events about 4 times a week for about 15 participants per event. Our game approach here, right? We designed 14 original games. for us to implement for usually artistic purposes. And then we hosted 8 other games with local game designers, often, and then some traveling game designers. We worked with 18 game designers in total from 11 different national backgrounds. We also facilitated 4 different play communities, and we worked with traditional artists who were seeking more engagement with their work. So any traditional artist, and I think we worked with 8 of them, who was interested in getting more people in connection with their work, but wasn't seeking money from us, we were down to clown. And we were bringing people in and trying to support them in that way, viewing kind of an artistic format and engaging with it as a form of play. We also hosted a series of research talks, and we had 25 researchers who gave talks over this first year. We had 21 external partners, and we are turning a variety of our outputs into kind of academic outputs as well. So we're trying to turn some of our games into research papers, research through design papers, things like this. And this is kind of a new thing. So if people have thoughts or opinions on how to tap this stuff into larger communities, that is all really interesting and exciting for us. That's been a big part of the work. This is, to give you a taste, this is our schedule that we promoted for October. You can see all sorts of things here. The Benediction LARP was a LARP designed by Laura Optebeck, who was in Tampere for that period and ran a play test. You see In the Skin of a Wolf, which was an originally designed game about trust and betrayal in medieval Germany. Yeah, and so this is the kind of stuff we were doing, especially when we had a space, 5 days a week, 6 days a week was pretty common for running events. Yeah, and so doing this, we kind of hit into a series of ideas and claims about what we meant when we were designing these art games. These are the kind of 8 principles that we kind of worked out for what we looked at when it came to games. We were dealing with live action role-playing games. For our art games, we were dealing with embodied metaphors or actions that were metaphors for other things that were not happening. Goals as an expressive medium versus a pure achievement medium. Painfully aggressive clarity, which is one of our practical things learned, is that confusion kills it for a lot of our players. Cycles of action, usually guided by music. Big, shocking, memorable moments. Character building and relationship building, where people have relationships between characters in order to socially exist. All players need explicit space and time to deal with all people and things, or what I call around fuck around space with things, and then interactor game runners. So these are people who are actors kind of reinforcing the vibe or the mood of this world that we are putting people in. And my philosophy for games as art, which is not shared by everyone who runs these things, right, but is that I want to tap into the creation of experiences that people in their terrible, terrified, vulnerable selves want, experiences that they want so deeply that they could never justify it, and to do it would almost be insulting or would be off topic, and I really want people to play above all of these restrictions or rationalizations. I do believe people can open and play to this depth, and anytime they don't, I, as a designer, think I have failed. This is definitely the point where a lot of my co-organizers strongly disagree. But for me, this is what I'm trying to do, right? It's trying to get people into a playful space that is so much more vulnerable, heightened, or wild, that you can have an experience that you wouldn't have if you weren't willing to do that. Yeah. So there's problems with that. A lot of people are just not so into the wild, vulnerable, intense world and experience of things. Yeah, a lot of our challenges for building this kind of space, right, a home for games as an artistic medium, dealt with the harsh realities of running things, right? So our number one kind of event, we had a lot of cancellations, right? A lot of things that died because people just weren't interested. They weren't going to show up. And the number one was game jams, where we had 4 out of the 5 game jams that we designed to run totally dive bombed, and were no-show events, right? And a lot of these things dealt with labor. things that required labor. People had to be really kind of coaxed, warmly guided to attend these events. Game designers presenting their work also had a really high rate of failure. About half of the game designers we tried to bring in their work had basically no reaction or response from the community. And I think the way that kind of sadly we had to frame it, or the way that I frame it, right, is that these were people were acclimated to extremely high value events, and they were dealing with us like an experiential product, right? And people, especially in Finland, right, dealing with live action role playing games, are used to extremely experientially subsidized versions of live action role playing, right? And so some of our events have massive experiential subsidy, like our research talks, where we have 3 researchers who often have, decades of experience on a topic, and then they volunteer 10, 20 minutes of their time, much, like academics are just used to doing it. And then people get to listen to them. And it's really incredible, right, that these people are for free giving things that take decades of experience to build. And so, of course, that creates a reason to attend, right? You are sucking out goodness from the experience. Yeah, and so we had a lot of real schedules that looked a lot like this, right? Where it's like half of things are canceled through non-attendance, through basically not being able to, I don't even know, like warmly coax people to accept these very hard to enact artistic pieces or ideas or labor, right? You had to put in the labor to get them to receive the labor. Yeah, and so they were dealing with us as an economic leisure service, and so they were, we were competing with everything. We were in like an economic competition with like Magic the Gathering tournaments and Netflix and people wanting to sleep and take a nap and, these really great things. And then the live action role playing scene that we're in, right, in the Nordic LARP world, is we got a lot of reaction of people saying things where like, this isn't really my type of LARP. And we were designing a lot of these 5-hour small, what was called chamber LARPs, right, before. And what people wanted were very high fidelity, location, production value, spectacle, high investment, high return, things that are just incredibly expensive, right? And so, and designing them and running them takes labor that is usually just not compensated. And so it kind of felt that there's a little bit of this acclimation to an experiential labor subsidy within this artistic game, live action role playing world. But then this is, I realized that it's an ongoing problem, right? That's always been a tension of the idea of art, right? And maybe that's the problem between, the idea of inclusive home, right? Which I would say has a lot to do with trying to build a community, these personal, as Vider says, personal, cultural, political connection and recognition, right? Of wanting people to come into your home, in which people really dealt with us as an experience economy good, right? As a game, as a leisure service, as something to relax, as all of these things, versus the reality of something like art, which often resists this kind of easefulness of the simplistic, clear, pleasure moment, right? And I think this is really where we are dealing with a little bit of a tension here in trying to build a home for both playfulness, right? In which I take a very broad spectrum approach, but Cineros describes as all activity done for its own sake. And I think we supported a lot of activities done for their own sake, and an artistic home, right? And this is a quote from Grotowski from Towards a Poor Theater. And my background was performance studies before games, but I think this applies to a lot of what I think about with games, right? Where we are concerned with a spectator who has genuine spiritual needs, who really wishes through confrontation with the performance, or in this case, the game, to analyze himself. And this comes from a section of Towards a Poor Theater where he rejects a lot of the ways theater is viewed, right? As a leisure service, as something that you can do to talk about afterwards as a piece of cultural capital. And I think the Games as Arts Center, and really probably any attempt to build a place that homes artistic games, will have to deal with, it is hard, right, to confront oneself. It is hard to deal with the claim of artistic meaning above and beyond that which rewards us, or that which passes the time peacefully. So we had a lot of things that were not very home-like, also not very art-like, right? We had a series of challenges to our work. We had a challenge at the beginning, right, of is not art elitist? What is the point of this term? And I think that comes from a history of art institutions versus things like performance studies, artistry, right, Grotowski and these kinds of art hubs that fucked off into barns and undulated for 2 hours. So I think we kind of solved the art problem for us. And then we have other more practical questions, right? Who does the labor? Who pays for things? Where is the money coming from? Things cost money. Everything costs money, which is sort of a capitalism problem. Also, sort of just as feminism has talked about forever, right? The invisible labor problem, right? Of who takes out the garbage, right? And there's a lot of solutions to that, but it's a complicated problem. Yeah. So, anyways, we are the Games as Art Center. We are booking research talks and all sorts of events for our second year. So, if you would like to talk to me about any of these kinds of things, please feel free to send me an email. I would love to talk to you about any ideas or events.
Great, wonderful. As always, we'll be holding questions till the end, but feel free to use the Q&A function on Zoom to type questions. And then if my fellow organizers might cut and paste questions that appear in Discord into the chat, because I'm not looking at it at all at this moment. Up next is Valerio Moccia on transforming board gaming spaces from analog taverns to digital living rooms.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. Hi, my name is Valerio Moccia. I'm a PhD candidate at Ulm University, Milan, Italy. And my research at Ulm focuses on the intersection of television and board games. In particular, I studied the remediation of board games on television and vice versa. Today, I will present first results of an investigation on board gaming spaces. As you can see by the title, Transforming Board Gaming Spaces from Analog Tavern to Digital Living Rooms, my aim is to analyze the evolution of physical environments from board games, from traditional venues to contemporary hybrid context. The presentation is divided in 3 main sections. First, we will examine the evolution of gaming spaces from the Greco-Roman era to the present day. Next, we will explore the development of gaming tables and furniture, trying to trace their transformation from the Roman era again to the contemporary times. And finally, I'll try to discuss the digital revolution and its impact on gaming table, as well as the rise of the UI communities and systems that can be described as phygital, which is a term that defines the blending of physical and digital elements. In the end, I will quickly focus on Teburu, which is an innovative platform that integrates digital and analog elements into board gaming practices. Well, let's start. Archaeological evidence provides ample testimony to the prevalence of gaming and its venues in the Greco-Roman era. Gaming beyond mere gambling was a common pastime among adults, and 3 primary locations are evident in the remaining representation. The first is the military camp, where soldiers played games such as Pentagram Mai, 5 lines. We can see it here depicted on a Greek amphora featuring Ajax and Achilles. The second is the inn, known by the Romans as Capuana. This was a place where civilians often played games for betting. And the third place are all the outdoor locations, for example, marble stairs of buildings, of temples, that were adapted with engravings to serve as semi-permanent playing fields. All these spaces illustrate how gaming was actually interwoven into the daily and social life of ancient cultures. Let's go on and advance several centuries. We are now in the Middle Ages and we encounter taverns. Specifically in Italy, we encounter baratterie. And during this period, regulation became increasingly stringent as gaming, particularly gambling, was deemed immoral. Designated places for board and card games became necessary, and like in the Roman Capuana, these medieval gaming venues were often associated with food and with drinks. While those were not the sole gaming location used in the medieval era, the repressive laws fostered a separation between public, predominantly physical games, which later sometimes evolved into sports, and those played in private spaces. This shift to the privatization of board gaming experiences profoundly influenced the perception and practice of gaming, shaping the cultural landscape of future leisure activities. Continuing this trend, we can see the emergence of Venetian ridotti, small apartments or even simple rooms where Venetian citizens used to meet, spend the night hours together, having some fun. And those were also the first casinos where gambling was highly regulated and intertwined with the activities of a brothel, reinforcing the idea that gaming and licentiousness are associated in a way in the popular Vulgate. In the early 19th century, middle-class Victorian halls began to feature parlors, following the fashion of noble houses, and this development gave rise to a space that actually we know would name an entire genre of games, parlor games. Structured parlor environment blended domesticity with social interaction, providing a controlled settings for leisure that was deemed fit by the high society. And then in the 20th and 21st centuries, urbanization and proliferation of living rooms, which integrated living and dining areas in middle and upper class homes, led to the creation of two additional social gaming venues. Family gaming, even when we think about it in media representation, generally took place in the living room. Additional spaces in the home were instead sometimes transformed into more and more into man caves, areas that were reserved for male social interaction, typically deemed inaccessible to women by the male users. The prevalence of particular kind of games and leisure activities in these male-dominated spaces contributed to the incentivization of an already enough patriarchal gaming culture, influencing social and cultural dynamics of gaming. Such is the importance of the living room that in contemporary times, some public spaces designed for analog gaming try to emulate it as well as they can. Board game cafes, for example, are often designed to be warm, to be cozy, to be welcoming, and they try to recreate the dynamics of a home living room. The social interaction within these spaces are highly informal, and those are akin to those among friends and family at home. They strive to provide relaxed and comfortable settings for all the players. As of now, we have observed the evolution of gaming spaces from the Greco-Roman era to the present, but we have yet to discuss how gaming furniture has changed over time. We have few remnants of Roman era gaming tables, but still we have some. And the continuity in gaming furniture design that we can observe underscores some of the persistent needs and habits associated with gaming. We have here a sum table for Ludus Duodecim Scriptorum, and this we can see that resembles in a way modern coffee tables, both in size and in height. We have affordances associated with it, and those affordances are akin to most of the furniture that we will see in the next two slides. From the medieval to Victorian era, gaming surfaces become more and more specialized, and in a way we can also say classist. Nobility played on elaborately decorated, inlaid gaming table made each for a specific game, while commoners used the table of the inns. This period also saw the emergence of furniture dedicated to game storage. Another example that we have here is the Kriegspiel cabinet. Kriegspiel is the ancestor of modern war games, gifted to the Prussian king Friedrich Wilhelm III in 1812. This piece that we can see here on the right is now housed in Berlin's Charlottenburg Palace. Kriegspiel field set, so a smaller version of what we see here, were also used widely within the Prussian army to study tactics. And again, we are in an idea that we already saw, the enduring relationship between military spaces and analog games, as we've seen with the Greek vase depicting Ajax and Achilles. The emergence of living rooms being fundamentally limited spaces because they sum up two different spaces that originally were dedicated to other things, required the creation of multifunctional furniture. In the early 2000s, a market emerged for multifunctional gaming table designed for board games, war games, and role-playing games that could also double as dining tables. Due to their high cost, these tables occupy a niche market catering primarily to affluent consumer and reinforcing again the idea of a class division between game space users. Simultaneously, the renewed popularity of board games has fostered player communities dedicated to game preservation and to game collection, highlighting the need for efficient home archiving solution. I'm sure we are all familiar with the image on the left, which is a notable example, the IKEA Kallax shelves used for board game storage. We can also see that there are numerous DIY guides that are available for customizing these pieces of furniture. Again, reinforcing the idea that there is a community that is strongly interested in a democratization process of gaming furnitures. Before moving on to the final part of the presentation, I think it's worth pausing to analyze the trends that we observed thus far. The first trend is the progressive shift of analog games, particularly board games, from public to private spaces, amplified by social and moral pressures on gaming and leisure time. The second trend is the increasing specialization of spaces and furnishing dedicated to various types of games. And the third trend is the persistent association of board gaming throughout history with licentiousness and informality, which gaming that is often accompanied by eating, by drinking, and by strong socialization. This dynamic were also influenced by societal power relations, and those societal power relations has led to predominantly male gaming cultures and a strong distinction between the gaming spaces of affluent and popular classes. Board gaming spaces have evolved with the convergence of analog and digital components. New technologies have significantly influenced the development of gaming environments, blurring the lines between physical and digital play. In 2008, Microsoft announced Surface, a table integrated with display featuring 5 infrared cameras capable of recognizing various objects on the screen, including tags. And in 2010, the Surfacescape project by Carnegie Mellon University Entertainment Technology Center created a demo for playing tabletop role-playing games on the Microsoft Surface table. All these innovation marked significant strides in integrating technology into board gaming, paving the way for the future success of virtual tabletop software. Following the buzz around the Microsoft Surface and other horizontal interactive digital screens, the UI community has recently fostered the production of gaming tables with built-in screens and television, often used with virtual tabletop software. This innovation enriched a growing market of hybrid board games, but 3 challenges, in my opinion, now remains. The first challenge is accessibility. There is a requirement of digital skill, of financial resources, of available space. The second challenge is flexibility, because all these solutions are in a way fixed in a place. They can't be moved. They are rigid in the software that can be used. And the third problem is the limited affordance of this solution. Despite we can call them playable mediums, these devices often fail, in my opinion, to provide a truly frictionless and engaging experience, highlighting the challenges in their adoption and widespread use. And now we go to Taboorum. This is, in my opinion, a potential solution to this problem that lies in analog gaming platform that integrates traditional board game practices with digital features. Taboorum is a gaming system developed by the Italian company Explored, which combines analog and digital elements through a board equipped with magnetic sensor and RFID to detect and track all components. This system offers a new dimension of interaction and engagement, blending both the best of both worlds, digital and analog, and in a way overcoming some of the limitation of the previous systems. Particularly the relatively low cost, the potential adaptability to various types of games and game boards, and the use of familiar tools like pieces and tokens, meeples, all the things that you usually have, miniatures that you usually have in board games. So all the affordances that we have interacting with them have allowed this product to stand out in the market. In 2023, Explored signed a partnership with Hasbro to develop a platform derived from Taboorum that combines digital and physical play, and they're trying to market it as a board game console, which is a term, in my opinion, that also is deeply problematic for some problem connected to the financial aspect of it, the power relation of proprietary software, etc. In conclusion, in this presentation, I've tried to explore the evolution of board gaming spaces, tracing their development from public venues to private settings, noting how gaming spaces have shifted from communal areas to more personal environments. With increasing specialization in furniture and design, for which the integration of digital elements is exemplified by Taboorum, represents just the latest trend in blending physical and digital aspects of gameplay. Thank you for your attention, and I'm available for any question or further discussion on this topic. Thanks.
Great, amazing. I'm really interested in all the physicality, spatiality that we've been talking about, materiality that we're talking about, which makes a nice segue to Jennifer Hartshorn's presentation on Home Away from Home, the material rhetoric of LARP props. And as a person who's made many a LARP prop, I'm fascinated to see what this is going to be about.
Thank you very much. Let me see if I can get the whole share screen thing to work. That's not what I wanted to share.
It's working now.
Okay, are you seeing the Home Away from Home, or are you seeing my paper?
You're seeing Home Away from Home.
Okay, cool. All right. So I am Jennifer Hartshorn. I'm a PhD student at Georgia State University. I'm also a retired game designer of tabletop and LARP games. So at some weekend-long foam sword combat LARPs, participants may remain in-game from Friday night through Sunday morning. Wake-up calls from goblins or orcs are possible, as are late-night visits from undead. And in a game that permits player versus player combat, you may be cabin raided by a rival group. And while some people go with a mundane sleeping bag and duffel bag, at many games, players elaborately decorate their temporary living spaces in ways that are appropriate to their character. In some cases, it may be that only the cabin's residents ever see these decorations, but for many players, that is beside the point. In Encountering Weird Objects, Lovecraft, LARP, and Speculative Philosophy, Buckley cites Walton and Bateman stating, "Props are generative. They prescribe specific imaginings, trigger emotions, and generate the fictional world of the game. They're created, but they in turn create the constructed reality of the character's world. Cabin decorations are a way for players to make their space more comfortable, express their creativity, create a more immersive environment, one in which the relationship between objects, people, and game create a complex web of meaning. Like a magic circle inscribed within the larger play area of the game site, it defines a uniquely personal space within the communal creative community. So first, I want to address the context that I'm writing from and about. From there, I'll go into the why. Why do players put this much effort into the material environment of a place they're only going to be for 3 days? And then we'll look at what kinds of objects are used to create the cabin environment and some examples. If this goes as expected, we'll probably zip right through the credits, but they are there for anyone who wants the slides. The games that I'm going to be discussing are all located in the southeastern United States, and they are all BOFFR, or live foam sword combat LARPs, that typically have between 50 and 200 players per weekend. An important distinction for those familiar with other styles is that these games are not full protocol in the Nordic sense, trying to eliminate water bottles, Coke cans, and electric lights entirely from the play atmosphere. The events are held at state park group camps that are often rented in the summer by scouting groups, summer camps, and family reunions. These camps often have extensive rules: no moving furniture, no open flame candles, no tents, and often no tacks or staples in the walls, or at least no remaining evidence afterwards, which places constraints on what players can do with their cabin spaces. All characters are created by the players, not assigned or pre-scripted, and weekend-long events may happen monthly in games that, in at least one case, continue for as many as 28 years, making cabin decorations a realistic investment for a hobby that may go a decade or more. The LARPs I have played in are typically in a fantasy setting and are live combat with foam or latex swords. Typically, these games use what is called a lightest touch combat system. Spells are simulated by throwing small birdseed beanbags at the target while reciting a spell verbal, and combat may be either hit location or hit point system. Players may end up traipsing through the woods in all manner of weather, day or night. So I'm examining the props and practical objects that players bring to these games and how they impact the players who are in this created environment. To do so, I am drawing primarily on a blend of visual and material rhetorics combined with the experience of role-playing in the game setting and exploring how these interact, amplify, and impact the ecology of place, objects, and people. Sicart addresses this, stating that material play is not just the activity of engaging with objects, it is a more complex process of negotiation of agencies and acknowledgement of materialities. The focus on materiality reveals the importance of play as a form of relating to objects, others, and the world. The play space defined by the cabin creates and complicates relationships between and among the inhabitants and objects that are mutually reinforcing, adding another dimension to game/role play for anyone who comes in contact with it. Whether a sword is possessed by an extraplanar intellect or not, when you have a tangible object, it has a history and an identity, and not just the qualities of silver +1 magic to hit and double damage against werewolves. So to better explain this, it's important to address what I mean by rhetoric. The essence of traditional rhetoric is the use of language to have an impact on the receiver. This is often persuasive, but there are many permutations and shades of meaning. In a game, the way that the world is described in writing or through role-playing influences the player's understanding of the game's setting, themes, and style through the use of written or spoken words. Many people are familiar with the concept of procedural rhetoric and the relation between the rules of how you play the game and how that shapes character goals and values. Costuming allows players to express their character visually to others through what they wear. In each case, the creator is shaping the receiver's perception and understanding of the situation, delimiting a play space by setting certain expectations. In this case, my focus is on the objects in a created environment, a home away from home that provides a base camp for the players who inhabit that inhabit it for that weekend, what messages it sends, and how it influences their role playing. A logical first question, especially upon seeing the time and effort that goes into making these props, is why? Why go to all the effort? The cabin's environment is the last thing you see at night and the first thing you see in the morning. It is a place to rest and recharge, a place where secret meetings take place in hushed tones. Loot is divided, rituals are cast, and guests, whether PCs or NPCs, may be hosted. As a result, the cabin must be a place for both mundane out-of-game activities and potentially intense role-playing situations. First, cabin decorations are a means of expressing the personality and identity of the cabin's inhabitants. A baronial lodge may have banners outside in their colors, while an herbalist may have a small garden outside the door. Inside, decorations could be more banners, tapestries, Christmas tree lights, or collections of objects that hold meaning to a character. They could convey hospitality, formality, the skills or professions of the inhabitants, or their culture and allegiances within the greater game world. On a number of levels, visual, material, tactile, even scent through the burning of incense, or music being played live or recorded, the sensory environment conveys identity. In addition, cabin decorations help to create an immersive environment. While the games in question do not forbid the use of plastic water bottles, even a piece of fabric thrown over a cooler helps to reduce the cognitive load on the part of the player, limiting the degree to which they have to suspend their disbelief. And while some people purchase all their cabin decorations, some sew pillowcases and curtains, upholster chair cushions, and create detailed labs and workshops as a hobby within the hobby, giving them a chance to engage with the game between weekend events. So when determining what items will make up the in-game environment, there are practical concerns as well as artistic and role-playing choices to make. I try to determine what items I have to bring anyway and look for ways to customize them to my character. For example, bedding, costuming, fabric-covered ottomans to store stuff in, a chest of drawers to put a lamp and a phone charger and water on, a trash receptacle, things like that. Those are the picture to the right are items that I used in a game that I stopped playing about 15 years ago, and yet somehow I was surprised that I didn't have all of my props for it. Go figure. All right, some more stuff. Things that are somewhat less essential, but are still cool. Things to organize tags, the out-of-game representation of in-play items, alchemy or poison labs and props. That first one is like a bookshelf of 3-ring binders that have a bunch of spells and formulas in it, spells or recipe books. The one all the way over to the right is my alchemy cabinet, which has an oil burner kind of thing, strainer, handles. That's where I have all the teas that I make at events and some of the little Tarani bottles of botanical syrups and things like that. I've also purchased items such as over-the-door hooks for cloaks and swords and to hang up the ubiquitous belt with pouches. This one is the herbalist props from one of the games that I played more recently. We got a lamp, one of those covered ottomans, a basket with coordinating fabric and some stuff in it. In the back is a poster that I got at Sleep No More that just happened to be a good match for my character. Silk plants. I got a little needlepoint thing that I did there, and the herbalist primer, which is an amazing prop and resource. This is something from a friend of mine who played a physician character. He had bandages, mortar and pestle, healing potions, alchemical solutions, also things like poisons if you have to knock somebody out to do surgery on them, latex knives, candles, and a jar of little plastic leeches, which was fun. Another friend of mine has a sign outside his cabin that lists off all the different kinds of services that he can provide, which obviously tells you a lot about who his character is. And then it's got Sahagwan heads made of paper mache that were impaled on spears, welcoming you to Ilestown. All right. So while elaborate cabin decorations can be a lot of work, both in terms of creating and curating them and the necessary setup and breakdown time, they can make a big difference in the gaming experience. A well-decorated cabin with good ambiance is more likely to be a destination for both NPCs and PCs, which not only increases player engagement with the game, it can also be a factor in the game master's physical design of the site. If you place the cabin that sells pastries next to the armor smith, next to the cabin that does music jam sessions, you have created a village area for players who enjoy that style of play and a differentiated identity for that location. On the other hand, if all your destination locations, places that serve food or drinks, important baronial embassies, etc., are together, this can create congestion and discourage exploration, as well as walking down dark trails suitable for ambush. Cabins that are decorated with intention and care can create a positive version of keeping up with the Joneses as groups decide to up their game, creating more immersive environments, in turn expanding possibilities for roleplay beyond the stand-up World of Warcraft stereotype many players enter fantasy LARPs with. What may start out as a way for individual player or group to enhance their role-playing experience can extend out to the game as a whole, shifting tone and creating a physical space for play styles that are more focused on roleplay, lore gathering, politics, and the arts. Props, specifically cabin decorations, can create an environment at LARPs that reflects character or group identity, in which objects influence and reinforce the game's setting and the character's personality, but they can also have influence beyond the cabin itself. They're an excellent example of an element of the game that provides no mechanical or rules advantage, but the intangible advantages extend beyond just the enjoyment of the cabin's inhabitants. As Sicart states, material play represents an entanglement of agencies and materialities that leads to the reconfiguration of the nature of objects and the world. A needlepoint project or painted banner that would otherwise just be a fun hobby can deepen and complicate the in-game environment in productive and interesting ways, as well as maintaining player interest and engagement between events. Interaction with tangible objects beyond weapons reinforces the setting of the game and the identity of the characters, creating a complex web of relationships that may extend far beyond the home away from home to the game as a whole. And I got my sources, my games, some of my resources, and everyone who took pictures that I used. And that's it. So thank you very much.
Great. Amazing.
Thank you.
Woohoo.
Stop share.
All right. Awesome. And up next, to round out the group, is Mirek Stolee on We Have Escape Rooms at Home, Escape Boxes, Space, and Genre.
Hi, everyone. I'm Mirek Stolee. I'm a Text and Technology PhD student at the University of Central Florida. And yeah, you heard the title. So I've been long fascinated with the escape room or escape rooms as a sort of broad genre, trying to understand, like how this works, operates in this sort of live action context, as we are, pretty familiar. But you can see, these digital forms, the VR forms. And today I'm going to focus on tabletop escape games. So the sort of idea of doing an escape room, but doing it at your home or, whatever context in which you would play it. Part of this is, I published this sort of taxonomy of games before, of escape games before. And one thing I am moving away from tabletop escape games as a sort of label and towards escape boxes, because when I first started doing this research, I was looking primarily at escape games that were using, pretty conventional board game components, things like cards, lots of cards. That's a big one. But I could see this sort of wider heterogeneity happening in this space. This game, Escape the Room, The Cursed Dollhouse, has got three-dimensional dollhouse recreation. This is Escape Room in a box in the sense that it's a puzzle box, right? And the box itself is the escape room. So how do I understand these sort of things? And what does this sort of tell us about escape rooms as a genre? And also, escape rooms that are jigsaw puzzles. So looking at escape boxes, I'm interested, of course, how, the escape room concept is embodied in the escape boxes. All of them, or many of them coming from this sort of idea of, okay, we're going to take an escape room, we're going to make it, something you could do at the house. And noticing really, again, this sort of heterogeneity happening here in this space of different ways of approaching, what is an escape room? What can we capture at the home? And the wider influences happening here, things like, okay, coming from board games influence, LARPing influence, these sort of things are coming together to create, a much wider space than I was initially, considering. And here's just an example. Exit the Game is a really prominent series of escape rooms. It's a series of escape room games for the home, right? Framing it explicitly as, the escape room thing, this big commercial phenomenon, and here is that in a version that you can play at your house. So I consider this, and thinking about, if we are, thinking of these as escape rooms for the home, that tells us, both, what do the creators consider, what is an escape room, and what can we transfer, and then what is the home? What kind of space do we imagine this is being played in? So I've been using a lot of, escape room specific research. So Scott Nicholson has some of, who actually did the keynote, I think a couple of years ago, or one of the keynotes at Generation Analog. But he's using this sort of definition of escape rooms, thinking about them, players are trapped in a space, they have to, do these challenges in order to get out. And I broadened that definition to try to encompass all of these different multimedia forms of the escape room, which really, I said it was a sequence of challenges bound to a specific space, this sort of, vague to the point of meaninglessness, I think, at this point. But, trying to capture this, like, the spatial component is very key here, right? An escape room, right? Trying to understand, how do all these different games represent spatiality across media? So looking at, game studies, the way that people have approached space, Jesper Juhl in The Casual Revolution talks about, when you're playing a video game, you have the player space that you are living in, and then, the 3D space that you see through the screen. And so, but looking at that, like, there's no screen here, right? So looking at, how do board games do this sort of thing? Nathan Altice in Analog Game Studies talks about how cards are spatial objects, right? When we look at, like, board games, they're splayed out among on a table. So, card arrangements can represent metaphorical, narrative, representational, geographic, and other hybrid spaces. So looking at, board games, how do they do this sort of thing? How do escape boxes do that specifically? In order to do that, I want to sort of broaden beyond Jesper Juhl's sort of definition of space. Marie-Laure Ryan provides a more generalized view of how media in general represents space. So making this distinction between the space that's being represented and then the space that it is like surrounding the object, presumably from where the audience is. So something very similar to Yule's framework, but something that is more media agnostic. So the main distinction I want to make between here is, again, the player space and then the sort of represented space. So the player, the players are playing at a table, maybe, and that sort of surrounding space. And then, but ostensibly they are in, like space, a spaceship or whatever, a criminal HQ, that sort of thing. There is this sort of imaginary space, right? So thinking, digging a little further, again, pulling from Brian, thinking about space versus place, where space is a sort of abstract understanding, the sort of Cartesian coordinates, this is the space, whereas place is something that is more meaningful to humans. It's this environment where we develop bonds with the land or with the people around us, and associate that. So I think this is really important because home is so charged, right? With emotions, either positive or negative. So using these sort of frameworks, I want to walk through some of the different strategies that I see are happening in these places. And this is, a pretty preliminary analysis. So I'm really interested to hear what experts from spaces that might be adjacent, such as LARPs, that sort of thing, could help me. That'd be great for me. So looking at like a 3D represented space, again, this is something that is more distinguished. The player space and the represented space are pretty separate, right? If we look at like Clue, normal Clue, the board game, that sort of thing, it's like we have a board that represents the place. And I have a little token that represents where I am, but I'm not. It's not like trying to envelop me in that space, right? But when we see Clue Escape, there's this interest in this sort of three-dimensional component. I think to sort of capture this sort of spatial three-dimensional quality that I think is all of these different strategies I'm seeing, I think are less common in board games. They're kind of unusual. This sort of thing we do see in board games occasionally, but it's a little unusual. Things like this, such as Mention's pop-up mystery manor, we can see this sort of, very detailed like paper facsimile of a space, of a kitchen with little doors that can open, that sort of thing. And of course, like I mentioned, the cursed dollhouse, though this one is a little unusual, because like in the story, it's like a cursed dollhouse, and it's like you are actually like shrunken and supposed to be in this space, which is kind of cute. Another strategy I see is the inclusion of diegetic components. So this sort of mixture between player space and represented space, escape room in a box, the werewolf experiment, as soon as you open it, it's a box, right? It releases a poisonous vapor that has now recontextualized the space you're in. All of us, have now been exposed to this gas, and we're all going to become werewolves, right? And as part of that, we can see like these are meant to be objects from the game world, a lot like the material props that we just talked about. I think there's a lot of cool connections in this panel. And pulling from Carly Kasurik, talking about digital adventure games and how they sometimes came with physical components like feelies. Again, this sort of a material connection with the game world or the represented space in this way. So we see this sort of blurring by using objects as a sort of threshold between these two spaces. We can see this again in Escape Room in a Box, which actually like makes it tries to make the box look like it's a package that you just received, right? And again, this Escape Room in a Box, this sort of thing is an object, right? That is, trying to, I presume, bringing you into this sort of world where this puzzle box is a diegetic object. And then finally, I'm interested in how games approach recontextualizing home spaces. So we talked a little bit about this just a second ago, but also, LARP trying to take an existing space and then, trying to imbue that with meaning like from the game world. So this sort of equivalence, or at least some sort of congruence in a spatial way of trying to make these things the same. And because of this, I think place is an interesting distinction here, because you're presumably playing in a place that is meaningful to you, or is meaningful to some people. We have a place, and now we're trying to superimpose another fictional place onto it. So an example here, is a game called Escape Box Pirates, where you are supposed to hide cards around your home or around your play space, where kids can go and look for those cards. So trying to activate your existing space. A more like another strategy here that I think goes even further is Escape Your House Spy Team, where they have these little locks you're supposed to put on the rooms in your home. You're supposed to like lock yourself in your house using this like lock. You're supposed to put that on like your front door. And I think that's interesting, in the first missions of that game, they are ostensibly taking place in your house, like you're auditioning for like a spy agency. But later on, it takes place in an underwater base. So adding, again, this sort of fictional component where Area 3, your bathroom, might now become a submarine port. So looking at these sort of things, what are these sort of saying about escape rooms? So I think they emphasize different aspects of these definitions of escape rooms. A lot of escape rooms like don't really emphasize the fact that you're trapped in a space. It's called escape rooms, but the sort of trapped element I think has become sort of passé. So to see that being emphasized or not emphasized in specific designs is interesting. I think these 3D spaces really emphasize the finding of hidden objects. And this is an interesting example of a game that was designed during the early days of the pandemic for playing over Zoom chat or whatever, video chat. It has like dialogue you're supposed to read to one another. And it really, this was a game made by an escape room company. And they try to simulate this thing where you take a picture with your team at the end and you have a little sign that says successful escape. So those are things they consider an important part of the escape room experience. So in this, Scott Nicholson identifies all these different influences on escape rooms and trying to understand, how might those influence what we define as an escape room, what an escape room actually is. Don't look at this horrible hexagon. Oh my God. Okay, and then finally, what does all of this, say about home and home spaces? So looking at, some of this space and place research, thinking about, a home as a significant kind of place where we might have these strong attachments to that space. But also it's an open place, maintained and developed through social relations, right? We invite people into our homes, we exist in a social context. And I think, a lot of these ideas of home as like place emphasize the sort of positive emotions there. But looking at, a more broad angle, Jason Bryant, talking about the meaning of queer home, talks about, deconstructing homes as this sort of, this is a place where a nuclear family lives, that sort of thing, while trying to open it up to wider conceptual possibilities. And also the material aspect of making sure people who are queer have access to these kinds of spaces. So when we look at a game like this, it's envisioning a parent and multiple children, same, but here this is mentioning it's playable in any house, right? Not everyone has a house. Looking at the diagram they create, like for the imagined space, not everyone has a 3-bedroom apartment either. They do emphasize, like they give guidelines for separating one room into multiple rooms, but and then looking at this game, exit the Advent calendar, right? Clearly targeted towards people who celebrate Advent, right? Christians, particular Christian denominations. So what sort of assumptions are we making about the home as well? So I'm really excited for the Q&A. It seems like there's going to be a lot of interesting conversation. So thank you all very much. I will talk to you in a second here.
Amazing. Great. Awesome. Looks like there are questions queuing up. Should get everyone on screen if they want. So if Leland is around, can pop back on. Okay, so I'm just gonna offer a little bit of a sort of my framing question, and then hopefully that will spur some stuff. Just sort of drawing some through lines through all the text. And so I'm just hitting keywords like I think materiality, thinking about game or in-game or out-of-game objects, things that, and then I think class or what kind of leisure capabilities for leisure you have, and whether that's I'm just going to play at home or I'm going to set up my own home somewhere else. That stuff sort of runs through. And maybe my question would be interested, and especially like even in the art space situation with Leland, I'm interested in the like tension of like not getting people to come, to attend these spaces, and that tension between, maybe especially post-pandemic where people are like, I'm going to take my leisure time and I'm going to do it at home because I don't want to go outside, versus I have the capability to pay money to take my leisure outside of the home, but I also expect very particular things, right? And so that tension of like you get what you pay for, kind of, I've often been told like if you're making your event free, then people won't come. But if you don't make it free, then people won't come, right? Like, so I don't know if that spurs anybody's uh, thoughts, but feel free to answer. Not everyone has to answer. And then if we have a moment, I can move on to the questions in the chat. Terrible question, clearly.
Well,
Well, I can
I'll
start.
address some of the how that relates to the LARPs that I've played. You can play many kinds of LARP with very minimal investment of time and money and effort. Sweatpants and belt a t-shirt, then you're good to go. Or you can also invest a lot of time and a lot of money. When I was researching some of this stuff, I kept coming on finding Reddits and things that said, "Why is LARP so expensive?" And I was thinking, aren't there an awful lot of hobbies that get expensive really fast? And I think that it's the kind of thing where you can participate at any level that you're comfortable with. But on the other hand, I have definitely seen over the course of the last 30 years, as the population of people who come to LARPs has been aging and has moved into different income brackets, I'm not sure how many people a Blockbuster LARP that charges $800 a weekend would have gotten in 1995, but now that they're able to, and that also goes to what you were saying about hitting the sweet spot of how much you charge for something, because if you charge too little, then they'll devalue it, but if you charge too much, they can't afford it.
Yeah, I think honestly, it's what I was seeing from behavior was people are accounting the value they think they'll get out of it versus the price, where their time and energy is a huge price. Right? And I think even within the blockbuster LARP scene, there's a little bit of this awkward tension of the business of LARP, right? Because, Disney tried to make money, right, doing blockbuster LARPs. And the price point for profitable blockbusters was what, $2,000, $3,000 for 3 days? So I think most blockbuster LARPs that we have are still subsidized to the tune of $2,000. I think about Odysseus that just happened in Finland, right? And it had 100 designers working on it for 10 months for free for 300 players, something around that lines. And awesome people, incredible people, right? Doing lights, electricians, engineers, massive amounts of labor to do these kinds of things. And I think that's pretty common in a lot of these things. I think the Boffer LARP model and world has the same deal, right? The organizers, they're not professional. And so it's kind of it's just an interesting space, right? Of the organizer takes out the trash because they want it the most, I guess. Or how you do that. I don't know.
Yes. opposite to what Jennifer said, one of the things that I underlined in my presentation is the fact that actually we have a problem with the cost of some of these accessories. The gaming table goes up to the start, I think, at $3,100. So it's quite a lot. And it's not something that everyone can afford. Almost no one actually can afford a piece of furniture just for gaming like that. And there is a problem. Mirek said it. Some games require things that people do not have, and some people cannot buy games. Here in Italy, for example, we have a resurgence in the last, I think, 5 years in public libraries borrowing, lending board games to people, which is quite a good thing because we need analog games literacy spreading towards everyone, basically, because this is something that otherwise has a huge cost. We know how much a good library of games, a varied library of games, or how much money are needed for an association to build a base from which to go on. And the last thing that I want to say is that I don't think that it's neutral that Hasbro actually bought Tableau, because we all saw what Hasbro did with the OGL gaming license of D&D. And the idea that there is this increasing digitalization, increasing privatization of gaming spaces, of gaming tools that are now requires that maybe you have a subscription. We have hybrid games that have free apps connected to them, but free for how long? And how long those apps, for example, the apps that are used in escape boxes, how long those apps will be running. So there is an inherent problem in the digitalization process of analog games that colludes with capitalism, with all the problem actually associated with capitalism, thematics of power, thematics of spaces, especially. My approach was a tentative idea to show how something that was public once now has become, because of increasing pressure, the increasing moral of the initial shame of the geek culture and all the things associated with it, a more and more private things. And this is problematic, at least.
Yeah, I mean, I call this the tyranny of realism, or the tyranny of trying to prove that you can make things look real or be more realistic. I look at the ways that cosplay culture has changed. When I started boffer LARPing, like, again, the belted bed sheet with a hole cut in it was perfectly fine, and now that bar keeps getting raised, because that's how you prove that you're a serious player, or whatever. And so it's kind of kooky. Mirek?
Oh yeah, I was just gonna, from an escape room perspective, I think it, it really connects to a lot of the stuff people have been saying. Yeah, and that sort of, arms race of increasing realism, I think we're seeing in escape rooms as well. Escape rooms are, of course, commercial spaces, a lot of the time. And there is this sort of idea in the escape room, like, fan community, that we're going through generations of escape rooms, and now the newest ones are super high tech and they have like electric locks. I don't know, and it's a lot cheaper presumably to make one that just has physical locks and keys, but that's really fallen out of favor. We are moving towards this increasingly immersive experience, and with that, of course, is coming the increased costs. And of course the costs to the consumer as well, talking about paying for LARPs, that sort of thing, thinking about, I've seen some of these escape boxes being marketed as like, oh, it's going to be cheaper than going to an escape room with your family because it's like $30 a person or more to do that. But there is this, like a lot of these other games, they are one-time uses, right? It's not, it's not a space for a lot of creativity. It's very goal-oriented, right? And the puzzles, you're done. And a lot of them actually, someone mentioned legacy games in the chat, talking about like they are destructive, right? A lot of the exit games, like you just like destroy the components while playing, and it just can't be done. So it's a one-time use for everybody. So there's a waste element there as well. So thank you.
That's actually a good segue to the questions in chat or the Q&A area. So I'm going to say this is Hane or something like that. They ask, I think particularly to you, Mirek. Thank you for your presentation. If your research addresses the Chinese Zhuben games, sort of murder mystery type games, I had to look that up. Have you looked into similarities and differences between Western and Eastern tradition games? Because the home Zhuben is growing very big.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Yeah, I like probably a lot of people in the sort of Western world first heard about Jubentia, pretty recently, within the last 6 months from people make games video with Quinn's, whatever. And it was awesome. And it's super interesting. But, that was a big part of that video was that a lot of these are not available in the English language. And I am limited in my lingual ability. But it's something where, there is escape rooms especially have a very big Eastern component as well. Eastern, like the sort of Japanese space where a lot of these initial ones were coming from. Everyone credits Real Escape Game, the first escape room in 2007. That's in Japan, right? This comes this whole space. And a lot of this, I'd be really curious to see, how things are different in Asia, and how I think escape rooms particularly, I think have a geographic element, right? They are spatially located. I talked to Scott Nicholson a couple of weeks ago about how, a specific city might have its own escape room norms because that's their concept of what an escape room is, right? So thinking about Jubentia, in that sort of cross-cultural context, I would love to look into it more, but I have to learn other languages first or talk to people who do. So maybe I should do that instead. Thank you.
This is from Sarah and Bowman for a question for Leland. Do you think there might be a relationship between the number of events your group was running and the player group perhaps running thin, since many people have limited leisure time and many other established LARP commitments and friend groups surrounding them?
Well, I think rhythm is always a part of it, right? But I think what was interesting is that certain events were really dying and not others. So I don't think rhythm is a very holistic explanation for things, right? So, research talks were thriving and they were running on that monthly logic. Games that we designed were doing better. Games where we brought in other designers often fell apart. And honestly, what we saw was that we were trying to cultivate a community of regular attendance. Shout out to all the people doing shout outs to us on the Discord. Great to have you guys. And really, we weren't really able to tap into LARPers at all, I would say. So anyone who had like a pre-established LARP world or connection, we had almost no interaction with, except for designers. So if we were working with like a designer, we might pull someone in, and then they may bring two people who know who they are or something kind of like that. But I don't really think it was just people running the well dry. It's always possible, for example, the game jams, maybe people can really only schedule one a year, and that's like the energy, that one maybe. But so, yeah, to an extent relevant, but I don't think it explains the story.
Okay. Brandon asks more thoughts. This is open to everyone about games, folk traditions, other forms of play that turn the space of the home into the play space of the game. So obviously escape boxes, but also things like Easter egg hunts, hide and seek, that sort of thing. And I mean, even for the LARP, for Jennifer, like the turning of the game space more into a home space, again, as a way to build a world around yourself, I think. So maybe vice back and forth. Yeah. Anybody?
Yeah, absolutely. And it makes me think of the other childhood thing that you do to play at home is to play house. to pretend that you and your friends are a family and, cook pretend foods and things like that. And yes, there have been people who have sarcastically referred to my style of playing LARPs as, oh, Jen's going to go play House in the Woods. But yeah, it's the same thing in terms of people who decorate their Sims house, or all kinds of things where you get to decorate something to make it your own. I think that there's an element of that in it, as well as things that you would do in the home are all things that you, not all, many of them are things that you can do at a LARP. It's just that that's not the main point of being there. You can knit at a LARP, you can do cross stitch at a LARP. That's not usually why people are there. Those are more hobbies that you do when you are at home, but they can be done there.
Yeah, I wanted to add, because this question actually made me think of a catalog of an exposition that I studied for this, which I will actually link in the big documents with all the other references, and it made me think of all the graffiti that we have of Roman children playing in the home, of those games, hide and seek, but not only hide and seek, for which they transformed the home in a way. In Pompeii, there are a lot of murali with those depictions. So it is quite striking for me, the fact that this folklore actually passed on in this clean way. When you observe the catalog, when you observe all the archaeological traces, you see that up to, I think I can say easily 70 years ago, the games were the same. The games were exactly the same. They had puppets for children. They had puppets with removable bellies, with fetuses inside. They had marionettes. They had all sorts of movable carts, like the ones that you push on the road. And all the games were the same, and all the games played in the home were the same games that were played here in Italy and around the world up to 70, 80 years ago, and sometimes even now. And it's fascinating for me how actually fascinating, and in a way also scaring for me, how in the last 40, 50 years, we have revolutionized the way in which we play inside the home according to mainly capitalistic ways, and also how our ways do not pay justice to all the cultural and intangible heritage that we have.
I dropped a link in the Discord chat for Suburban Consumption of the Monstrous, which is a compilation of LARPs that are played in the home. A lot of them are very dark, and if you know me, coming from me, that's saying something when I say something is really dark. But they most of them deal with food and cooking or consuming in some way. And so that's kind of tied in with the idea of the home. I think it came out of the pandemic and, ideas that people had with that. But that's just another resource that's out there if people are interested.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah,
I was. Okay, thank you. I'll just go. It's really quick. I'm just going to put another link in the chat. It's for another board game that tries to do this sort of recontextualization thing. So I think, coming from the sort of packaged board game area. Same idea. Thanks.
I was just gonna throw in there, I think if we're gonna talk about playing in the home, I think also we need to acknowledge how much invisible play happens in our life, right? Because a lot of our home becomes like very rote behavior. And if you start to, I was just living with my nephew who's 1 and my niece who's 6, right? And they come into the home and the 1-year-old's favorite game is to slam doors, right? And the person charges into the couch, right? The 6-year-old just crashes into the couch and lay down, right? As an adult, right? Okay, I lay in my bed. I'm like, oh, it's so soft, right? And I'm like, is that really not play? Right? The materiality of softness and seeking of that moment. You can see a real transition of like, where it's like imaginary, over the top physical play, where childhood, where a biologist would be like, it's play, until we get to like a calmer adult version, which is the exact same stuff. So I think there is a layer of like, we play with the home without transforming it. We do that radical transformative event as well, totally. But with our home, we play with it so much. Yeah.
That's great. There's a comment, and just again, this is about the cancellation stuff that you can read if you want, Leland. But talking about basically people don't have enough spoons for interactivity or creativity. Passive entertainment is easier, and this is happening across LARPs and such.
Yeah, I think also an honest explanation is that the current world we live in is very, very sexy. Right. And like we talk about digitalization, right, as having this radical transformative effect. And I think there's reasons for it, right? Because, one incredibly good designer somewhere in Belgium can draw something, right? And it can go everywhere, right? And I think we're not acclimated to a non-digital space where honestly things are going to look pretty crappy. And that's like a real part of that old 70-year-old puppet stuff. Like they look kind of crappy, right, compared to what we're used to. So I think totally there's exhaustion going on, absolutely. And if we're talking about any one person or any one period, yeah, totally. But I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that we're like, it's pretty easy to forget how plastics have made our world just magical, right? Or digitalization has made our world magical. And when we look at things not built on them, we're a little mid.
Any last thoughts? I'm always a big fan of ending a teeny bit early if folks are tapped out, especially as we get towards the end of the day. But any last thoughts from the gallery? Okay, there's a lot going on in chats or in Discord, so you'll have to go and scroll through. But thank you much. Thank you so much. Thank you to our presenters. And we go on our next break for 30 minutes. And when we come back, we have our one roundtable of the conference. And again, it is only an hour as opposed to 90 minutes. So we'll return for session 1D, Home Punk. Awesome. We might have created a new genre. So, all right. Enjoy, everyone.
Thank you.